for our alleged counsel. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive testimony in regards to a general election review. Wisconsin Eye is recording this. Hey, Wisconsin Eye. WisI.org, right? We have our social distance protocols in place, and with that, we would like to call our first person up today, which is Erick Kaardal. If you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'm very happy to be here, and it's the first time I've met a lot of you, so it might be helpful just to give a little bit of my background. I grew up in rural Minnesota, went to Harvard College on a ROTC scholarship, ended up being an officer, went to University of Chicago Law School, and then settled down in Minneapolis to practice law, but always practiced in western Wisconsin and have been admitted for 20-some years. Now, that's sort of a matter of fact, but what's interesting to you would be that early on in my career, I identified that I just like disagreeing with judges, and I ended up finding a practice representing people, that is businesses, landowners, and ordinary citizens in their legal problems with the government. And so I've made a career basically keeping the government on task, legal tasks. So I represent people suing the government. I've had over 200 appeals. And so that means that when you talk about appellate attorneys, you have to look at how much volume they have. So I've been through all these battles with the government all over the country. And what I've known, I've had two cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. 2002, the Republican Party of Minnesota v. White. It was the first time the First Amendment was ever applied to the judicial candidates. That was a 5-4 decision. In 2018, Minnesota Voters Alliance v. Mansky was a 7-2 decision, basically saying that election officials can't stop people from wearing politically themed apparel at the polling place. So with all this experience, the Wisconsin Voters Alliance, led by former Kewanee Board Chair Ron Hoyer, has hired me to represent them. So my client is the Wisconsin Voters Alliance. They've been very active with respect to election integrity, and they intend to. And one thing about election integrity that's important to understand, and this is true of me and true of Ron Hoyer and the rest, we're not aligned with a party, we're not aligned with a candidate. This isn't about the 2020 election, it's not about the 2022 election, it's not about the 2024 election. It's about the future of election integrity in Wisconsin. And is there an agreement, left, right, and up and down, on two things about elections? That is fairness and transparency. We need the transparency to make sure there's fairness. And so here we are. I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here. And so I don't mean to go over the fundamentals. I have 8 children, and they all play basketball. We're always going back to the fundamentals. So here with election integrity, we have to go back to the fundamentals too. So in my talk, it's conditions for diversion of election authority in Green Bay. So in Wisconsin, the state law commands the city clerks administer the local elections. The statute says municipal clerks, have charge and supervision of elections within a municipality. Our investigation, these are mostly emails, revealed the city clerk's election authority in Green Bay was diverted by the mayor's chief of staff. The city clerk opposed the private nonprofit Center for Tech and Civic Life grant conditions. So Center for Tech and Civic Life is a private corporation, and in its grant with the city of Green Bay, it had conditions. And those conditions meant you have to give the money back if you don't meet our conditions. So this isn't about money. This is about conditions. Okay, so we want all the Wisconsin cities to have lots of money, particularly private businesses are willing to give it to them, but it's about conditions. What are you getting in return? The reason why the federal government's skeptical of gifts to the federal government with conditions is they know the conditions are always something that the businesses want. So here you have a business, a Center for Tech and Civic Life, giving money with conditions. So the chief of staff of the mayor granted the private corporate employees access to election administration as part of the CTCL grant conditions. So you get the conditions in, then you introduce your allied private corporations. Okay, that's a big deal, because who runs the elections in Green Bay? Well, the municipal clerk is, and the municipal clerk here was appointed in April of 2020. So that's important to realize that the city appointed the clerk in April of 2020 for that election. So what control does the city have over the election? Well, the appointment of the clerk. That's a very significant responsibility and duty. But once you appoint the clerk, then the clerk has to do his or her job, in this case her job, Chris Teskey. So the city allowed grant conditions on the election process without the legal authority to do so. So that's pretty simple. We're just talking about fundamentals. So let's look at some of the emails. The mayor's office influences the city clerk's election administration responsibilities. So I'm just going to read from an email from Chris Teskey. I haven't been in any discussions or emails as to what they're going to do with the money. I only know what has been on the news in the media. Again, I feel I am being left out of the discussions and not listened to at the meetings. So here you have...
Can you refer to what date that is?
Yes, it's July 9th, 2020. So this was after the April appointment, before, the election. Let's go to the next. The mayor's office influences the city clerk's election administration responsibilities. So this is from a Chris Teskey email, July 9th, 2020 again. Quote, I just attended the ad hoc meeting on elections. I want to note here, the city council that approved the contract with the conditions also formed an ad hoc committee regarding the election. So not only did you have the council intervening, but the council had a committee intervening. So I also asked when these people from the grant give us advisors, who is going to be determining if their advice is legal or not. They're talking about private corporate advisors in your election administration process in Green Bay. Celestine Jeffries, who is the chief of staff for the mayor, Celestine also stated the ad hoc committee will be helping to make the decisions for the grant money. So this is the grant money used for election administration, and Celestine Jeffries is saying the ad hoc committee of the city council will be making decisions for the grant money. In other words, how the money is spent on election administration. I don't think it pays to talk to the mayor because he sides with Celestine, so I know this is what he wants. I just don't know where the clerk's office fits in anymore. So this is a diversion. Madam Chairperson told me, don't use the word usurpation, that's too hard. But the word diversion is a better word. So diversion, usurpation, they're kind of synonyms. You can use the word usurp. I'm going to use the word divert because I'm still investigating, right? Usurpation is really like the end of the story. That's like a legal conclusion, right? So we're just investigating, encouraging you to investigate. Let's go to the next slide. Non-governmental persons allowed access to election administration processes. The mayor's office, through the chief of staff, that's Celestine Jeffries, begins to allow access to private corporate partners, and it appears the chief of staff began relying on the private sector employees for election administration guidance. The city clerk was not consulted or informed of the organizational changes. So there are several allied private corporations. These allied private corporations work hand in hand with Center for Protected Civil Life, and they're introduced as experts in subject areas, like absentee ballot drop boxes, absentee ballot drop box pickup, trucks to pick up the absentee ballots from different places, designing the way the trucks would drive from the absentee ballot places to the central counting place. All these things were planned out by the private corporate partners as subject matter experts, but the money, the conditions allowed them in. So let's read the July 14th, 2020 email from Chris Teskey. Celestine also talked about having advisors from the organization giving the grant who will be helping us with the election, and I don't know anything about that. Then we go on to the August 28, 2020 email. I don't understand how people who don't have the knowledge of the process can tell us how to manage the election. This is very critical, and I worked in multiple states with Got Freedom, my organization, the 501c4 led by former Attorney General Phil Klein. But when we looked at the laws in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Georgia, and Arizona, it's like going from one European nation to the next. It's like one you're speaking German, one Italian, one French, except in these urban areas where the nonprofits came in. All of a sudden, like an anthropologist, you look, you say, oh, why are all these people in the urban areas, Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, now Green Bay, why are they talking the same language about elections? Why aren't they talking Wisconsin language, They're talking private corporate language about elections. It's so specific that the word that pops in my mind is absentee ballot processing versus absentee ballot tabulation. I mean, that is so foreign to any of these states, but so important to these private corporations because they wanted those separate. They wanted them separate because they wanted the absentee ballot process, which allows the curing of absentee ballot envelopes and applications separate from the tabulation. And so again, we're investigating that, but you look for clues. And the clues here are, oh my word, there's a foreign influence in Green Bay. So someone's introducing a new language, a new way to run elections. And here we have the evidence, right? That this is the evidence. The evidence is the emails saying, look, the private corporations gave the conditions because they wanted to run the election. They wanted to run the election their way. And Chris Teskey, to her credit, said, well, wait, Wisconsin has a way to run the election. So let's move to the next. The city clerk makes decisions reserved for the city clerk. That might be a misprint. Chris Teskey, October 7th, 2020 states, I didn't purchase this, Celestine did, and should be the one signing this. She is the one working with them. I'm not signing an affidavit for things Celestine did or purchased because she doesn't know election law. So what Ms. Teskey is saying is that Celestine Jeffries and that's the chief of staff for the mayor and the private corporations are purchasing things for the city which don't make sense to her under Wisconsin law and certainly aren't being approved by her. Clerk's office begins to leave due to diversion. This is the Chris Teskey October 22, 2020 email. And this is where Ms. Teskey is so upset, the city clerk, about this diversion of her authority that she writes, I want you to be aware about the clerk staff that stated if they had the money, they would walk out the door now. So in other words, the whole clerk staff was upset about the usurpation, the diversion. Another said, I don't want to work here anymore. And the third is actively looking for a new job. All because the mayor's staff, even Melissa, is bossing the clerk staff around. So you have to understand in the election integrity world, and okay, I'll admit, we in the election integrity world are nerds, right? These are like nerds because we're looking at all these documents and we're trying to find out what happens. But in the election integrity world, Chris Teskey is like a superhero because she's saying, the reason I was appointed city clerk was so that I would be under oath to be impartial regarding my election duties. And if you have those duties diverted, then you're breaching what I call the social contract. The social contract is, look, government, the public will accept your election results if the elections are run fairly and transparently. And so here in Green Bay, Chris Teskey was saying there's a problem because to have fair and transparent elections, the clerk needs to run them. If the clerk doesn't run them, then they're not fair and transparent. There's a fancy Latin phrase, rapes ipsa loquitur, means the thing speaks for itself. That if the clerk, the municipal clerk, is not running the election in the municipality, if the elected officials are through the city council, it's not a fair and transparent election. And so that's what happened in Green Bay. And these are facts. Now again, this isn't about the 2020 election. No one wants to go back and undo the results of the 2020 election. Your post-election contest procedures were exhausted. If you want to talk later about how they're not adequate to cover this kind of situation, I think it's almost impossible in a post-election contest to cover this kind of situation because the public officials have to follow your laws. You can't set up a system assuming public officials are going to violate election laws. I mean, it doesn't work. They gotta follow the law. Let's go to the next one. The city of Green Bay possesses no authority to impose conditions on election administration. Now, I think you folks have all won elections, so you know this, but I'm going to go through it anyway. The Wisconsin state legislature delegates limited authority to municipalities. No Wisconsin election law authorizes a municipality to adopt non-governmental corporate conditions of any kind for any kind of election, particularly federal election contests. That election authority is within the sole purview of the Wisconsin legislature through the Elections Clause. So remember in the Elections Clause, the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, the state legislature has control of the time, place, and manner of the election. And then the federal government can also have laws that are applicable, like the ones you know about, Help America Vote Act, so forth. Green Bay, under the conditions, is required to report back to a non-governmental corporate entity regarding the conduct of the federal election. So part of the clawback provisions I mentioned was the city of Green Bay owes a report to the Center for Tech and Civic Life. So now you have this reciprocal thing going on. Celestine Jeffries, who, by the way, is the new city clerk in Green Bay, replacing the former one, she's now saying she's going to apply for more money. So you have a closer relationship between the city of Green Bay and the Center for Tech and Civic Life than you have between the state legislature and the city of Green Bay with respect to election issues. And that's very disturbing, because that's not following the rule of law or even following the process. The next slide is the city of Green Bay intends to continue administering elections under private sector conditions. So I mentioned this, that she's been quoted, Celestine Jeffries, the former chief of staff, and now the Green Bay city clerk, is quoted by a local radio station intending to request additional grant money from CTCL with conditions attached. The preliminary investigation suggests sanctions by the chief of staff. In other words, we're investigating. Everyone wants to, the critics are going to say, well, Erick, you need to show a difference in the election outcome. Erick, you need to show some voter fraud. You need to show some election fraud. Well, no, that's not right. All I need to show are rule of law violations. And it's very serious business. When you allow one rule of law violation by a public official, it encourages others, and soon you find, what? A serial violator of the law. And we don't want public officials who serially violate the law. Now, on the flip side, you might say, well, are there a lot of these out there, Erick? And yeah, there are. There are a lot of times that public entities get in a routine of violating the law. If no one calls them on it, then nothing happens. So here you have something that may become routine, right? Something, you caught it right at the beginning, and we don't want it to become routine. We don't want every city to allow private corporations to come in and influence the election administration process. So, but our eyes are open, so we are looking for downstream stuff because we want to know what the private corporations were doing. So the preliminary investigation suggests the following actions were sanctioned by the chief of staff, not the clerk. Attempts to cure ballots. That means absentee ballots were incomplete or insufficient and they should have been rejected, but instead the private corporations were involved in curing the absentee ballots. Replace nonpartisan clerk's office workers in organizing central counting area. So, in other words, the clerk's office was supposed to have people in the central counting area, but instead there were these other private corporate officials. Report to chief of staff and not clerk, another diversion of duties. Acceptance of possible conditions that may be contrary to state election laws. And we're still studying those. Private corporate employees become more involved in election administration. So this is a very important point. Whitney May, co-founder of the Center for Tech and Civic Life, in a September 30, 2020 email, so this is from the private corporation, quote, she can help Chris with central count, making sure it's set up in a way that's safe and efficient for the clerk, staff, and observers. Essentially, she can take on any election task that you assign. I think you mentioned this before, but we have another person from elections group who is assisting Claire in Milwaukee. So all of this to say, having Dana in Green Bay isn't a new practice for the partners who are supporting the Wisconsin 5. So this area of the CTCL leader talking about the Wisconsin 5, which if you don't know, is the 5 cities that had the Center for Tech and Civic Life grants. So Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, Racine, and Green Bay. So they have a joint deal with Center for Tech and Civic Life, a $6 million deal, and they agreed to these conditions sort of collectively. So for $6 million, they agreed to the conditions. Why didn't they come to you and get more money if they needed more money? Why didn't the private corporations come to you and say, hey, we'll give you the money and then you can distribute it? Well, because they wanted to change how elections were administered in the Wisconsin Five. Now, in our investigation, we just got the documents from Green Bay, but you'll find in your investigation, or the Wisconsin Election Commission, or together, if we work together, we'll find that this repeats itself in the Wisconsin Five. That was all about putting in the money with conditions, inviting the private corporations to get the election administration they wanted. And so who represents the people? The people who elected you? Or as the private corporations, are they representing the people's interests? I think that gets to the fundamental issue, right? Who determines the law of election administration in Green Bay? So we go to the next page. And private corporate employees in Green Bay ballot chain of custody. Now, chain of custody, I'm introducing a new phrase. The chain of custody would be like when you see these armored trucks going around with money. They really keep good chain of custody on the money because they don't want to lose the money. The idea is in Wisconsin, we want to make sure there's chain of custody for your absentee ballots and your other ballots. And here, private corporate employees got into the Green Bay ballot chain of custody. So, on an October 2, 2020 letter, Michael Rubenstein, he was the National Vote at Home Institute lead for Wisconsin. He was a very talented fellow, business school graduate. He was on leave from a large accounting firm. I mean, just basically, a rock star. And he gets this job to basically go to Green Bay and administer the election. And so here he's writing, subject, ballot curing, quote, if you have a letter that goes out with rejected ballots, could you send that? If not, I can create one. Celestine, could we meet next week with someone from the clerk's office to go over ballot curing and adding a call person? So that's a private corporate employee. So it's not just the $400 million the Center for Tech and Civic Life gave to the urban areas. There's probably just as much funding the private corporations were influencing. So it's the money plus the employees. So the employees get in through the conditions, and then you have this diversion from the clerk staff. And another, on the same point, our investigation revealed Chief of Staff Interim City Clerk Celestine Jeffries did not have the City Clerk's office in control of the Central Count headquarters in lead up to the November 2020 general election or on election day. Michael Spitzer Rubenstein of the National Vote at Home Institute advised and set up the Central Count headquarters. On the hotel contract, that's the hotel contract, Mr. Rubenstein was granted primary access to the room, ballot counters, and absentee ballot openers. So in the next one, we'll get the quotes to support that. So here's the subject. Question about the Green Bay Central Count. Quote, hi, Sandy. I'm Michael Spitzer Rubenstein, advisor to the City of Green Bay through the National Vote at Home Institute. You see how offensive that is to the clerk's responsibilities. I'm helping the city set up Central Count for Tuesday. I've heard from Kim there was some sort of issue with using DS200s at Central Count. I'm trying to get the full backstory to advise her and the mayor, end of quote. But then the hotel contract says, number of keys to provide, 5. 4 to group and 1 for hotel to keep Christine Hall will hold for hotel. Deliver keys to Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. Michael Spitzer Rubenstein will be the on-site contact for the group. And then, quote, do not unlock the grand ballroom until Michael Spitzer Rubenstein requests and is with security when unlocking the grand ballroom door. So that's what happened. And so what I'm trying to do is minimize the distractions and just focus on the key fundamental diversion of election duties or usurpation, and that is the clerk is in charge of the election, and the wisdom of Wisconsin laws regarding that is the appointed clerk is to be impartial, fair, and transparent. And when you have political officials, the mayor's office, city council, the city council committee, and private corporations, Center for Tech and Civic Life, National Vote at Home Institute, and a half dozen others, you don't have the fairness and transparency. And so here we are, already March 10th. So what would it be, 5 months, 4 or 5 months after the election, and now you know what happened in Green Bay. And so all these folks are saying, oh, everything's fine. No, it's not fine. We're not going to try to change the 2020 election results. We're not even so concerned about 2022, 2024. But what we're concerned about is election integrity for this generation and the next generation and so on. Thank you so much.
Well, that was quite a bit. And you went through pretty promptly here. So do we have any questions? Okay, Representative Murphy, we'll go first.
It seems like I should have 100 questions, but I'll try to narrow it down here. So your investigation, how did you come up with the information? What was the process of your investigation?
To Green Bay's credit, there have been Open Records Act requests, and Green Bay, as far as I can tell, has fulfilled its obligations under the Open Records Act request laws. And so these were produced to either Wisconsin Voters Alliance or sort of allies of Wisconsin Voters Alliance and shared. So I want to be on the record that it seems like the city of Green Bay has honored the Open Records Act request law.
Okay. You talked about the clerk being appointed. That was the city clerk?
The municipal clerk, right?
The city clerk was appointed. Is that position generally an appointed position?
In Green Bay, yes.
Okay.
I'm just gonna.
I'm good for now.
Yeah, that would be good. Do we have any questions? Not at the moment. Okay, Representative Thiesfeld.
Just to follow up on Representative Murphy's question there, because I actually had written that down also. And I don't know, did you cheat off me sitting next to me here? Green Bay chooses to appoint its city clerk, and that's done by the mayor. I'm under the assumption, is that accurate?
Yeah, or the city council. I'm not sure.
Okay. But city clerks in municipalities can be elected also, correct?
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, yes, I guess that's correct.
Does legislative council have an answer for that?
My understanding is that municipal clerks are appointed. Just the mayor and the city council members are elected.
But county clerks.
County clerks, however, are elected, correct.
Okay, yeah, now my follow-up was going to be is does state law have any distinction between if they're elected as opposed to appointed? But apparently that is a moot point. One more follow-up here, and then I'll let some other get on the microphone. This CTCL, which is Center for Tech and Civic Life. I, for the life of me, not sure what that title has to do with election administration, but that's interesting. Any evidence we were able to uncover in not only Green Bay but other cities of a coordinated plan? I mean, is there anything on paper that you were able to come up with that they had a plan to do this? Because you said at the beginning it was remarkable how the election language seemed to change. Did you find any coordination, or have you looked into that at all yet?
Yes, that's all in the public domain. The Center for Tech and Civic Life, it was very public, the distribution of the $400 million to these urban centers. Wisconsin was very early in the process, and then Philadelphia was one of the early entrants too. And so, Detroit, Fulton County in Georgia, Maricopa County in Arizona. So, yeah, it's all in the public domain. Center for Tech and Civic Life presented that it was about COVID. But then when you look at these Green Bay documents, oh, okay, it was a lot more than just about COVID. Okay. So, and then again, the conditions you see were Center for Tech and Civic Life, and then there's an email basically saying, well, now that you've taken the grant, here are private corporate partners by subject area. And so Center for Tech and Civic Life wasn't the employer of Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein. That was National Vote at Home Institute, which is a whole different nonprofit. So you see how careful you have to be to not misstate it.
Hey, Madam Chair, if I could just have one more quick follow-up. When, maybe you said it, but I don't recall. When was the contract signed?
I think the contract was in July of 2020. I don't have that as an exhibit, but it's online. The five mayors that were involved and 5 city councils are very proud of this achievement, and so it's all in the public domain. This isn't something that, I mean, their response is that this was a great accomplishment, and my concern is it might be, but you violate the law. So, you know, it's a great accomplishment, but you violate the law. So, you know, someone, like I talked to an umpire once, and great slide at home plate, but you're out. And so you know, that's how it kind of works, is that, you know, election officials, just like all public officials, need to stay within the law. And even if they accomplish great things, when they go outside the law, then they have to be held accountable. And so some of their goals might have been laudable, but one thing we have to watch out for, this is a very serious matter with respect to that social contract, is it's just as bad to favor a demographic group with respect to elections as it is to suppress a voter group. So there are two types of evils here, right? No one wants a demographic group suppressed, but if you favor another demographic group, then you're all of a sudden, you're committing the same kind of evil. The elections are supposed to be impartial, nonpartisan, fair, transparent. It appears here that, you know, along the way, someone decided to favor demographic groups. And so that there's some case law on that. But I think here you have, in Wisconsin, these 5 cities, a unique situation, almost, so it's a fancy Latin phrase, sui generis, not like anything other. And so we have to slow down. We have to really slow down, moment by moment, and analyze what went wrong here. And this is the way to gain adherence to election integrity across the aisle, is to just, you know, basically reach out to the skeptics and so forth and say, look, we all want good elections for our children. We want to have our ideological battles, but the election's fair. Whoever wins, their policies take hold. But once you start messing with the elections, then it makes it more problematic. And so I think that's where we need to be. And I think that, you know, there are plenty of people of goodwill here, and we just have to slow it down and just, okay, look, Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein, he had the keys to the central counting room in Green Bay. Is that something we want statewide? Do we want the mayor's office and the chief of staff running the election, or the appointed clerk, when your statute has specific election duties? I think it's Chapter 5 for the municipal clerk to run that election, that municipality. One of the problems, I actually love the statutes regarding Wisconsin Election Commission and the administrative complaint process. It's a very open system, right? But one of the challenges on your remedies are people can go to the Wisconsin Election Commission and complain, and the Wisconsin Election Commission will investigate and give them a decision, is that when you have private corporate officials in, well, they're not subject to the Wisconsin Election Commission. So if you want to complain about Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein and how he ran the Green Bay election, you can't file a Wisconsin Election Commission complaint against him. So you know, what are we doing? What are we doing with Wisconsin elections? And you know, it's not the elections where you have one candidate or there's a weak candidate. You know, those in election integrity, you know, oh, fine. If all the decisions were lopsided, we wouldn't be concerned about it. But you know, but some of these elections for assembly member seats and so forth can be decided by a single vote. They can be decided by 10 votes, 100 votes. And then you had a presidential election decided by 20,000 votes. And today we're not even talking about indefinitely confined or any of those issues. There are plenty of those issues. We're talking about something more fundamental, and that is, does Wisconsin allow its urban areas, does it allow private corporations to run your elections, or is it going to be your clerks? And now sometimes, of course, the clerks will be allied with the private corporations, so you may not have the evidence like this, but that's why Chris Teskey stands out as an election integrity superhero, is because she understood these fundamentals. She was a great public servant. She was fantastic. I got appointed. My job is to make sure this is fair and transparent. There are problems. I mean, they weren't even being transparent or fair with the municipal clerk. Yeah, she was complaining, I don't even know. And ostensibly, the public should know, right? And so here you are representing the public, and you're finding out 4 or 5 months after the fact what happened in Green Bay, and in parallel, the other cities that I mentioned. And the other thing too about the the polarization of things, what I found out is that when you start talking about election integrity in like a zealous way, like I am, this is the most exciting thing, that you bring people together. You don't separate them. We want election integrity. We want city councils to do their job. We want mayors to do their job. We want the clerk to do their job. We want everyone to do their job. So it's a fair election. And if the other side wins, we'll accept that. But if there are these deficits in transparency and fairness, then it's harder to accept. And that's a problem because we want to have faith in our institutions, and it kind of starts with the elections.
Do you have any questions? Okay. Any further? Representative Sanfilippo, you've been very patient.
Thank you. Can you provide our committee with a list of laws that were violated?
Yes, the principal ones you can just find in, I think it's Chapter 5, which lays out the responsibilities of the Wisconsin Election Commission and the municipal clerk. So with respect to the general authority to implement elections in Wisconsin, it rests with the Wisconsin Election Commission. With respect to the specific authority, who's in charge and supervises the processes within a municipality, it's the municipal clerk. And so those are the two laws we're talking about. We're talking about who has the authority to run the elections and whether that authority was diverted by elected officials, the mayor and the city council, so that private corporations would have a role. I want to finish that. Then my critics will say, oh, but we want to see things downstream. But we're not going to talk about downstream until we're done with our investigation. Right now, we're just going to focus on the simple authority question. Who has the authority in Green Bay to exercise election duties? And that's the municipal clerk who's appointed, and then the Wisconsin Election Commission has general authority. So how it works, and again, I don't want to, this is an important point. So if I have a complaint in Green Bay about the way the clerk's doing it, then the Wisconsin Elections Commission is authorized by statute to hear the complaint from the resident. Only the resident can file. So the resident files. The Wisconsin Election Commission then has the authority to correct the clerk. So once you introduce the mayor and the mayor's chief of staff, the city councils and its conditions with the CTCL, and the city council appointed committee, and National Vote at Home Institute, and the other private corporations, the Wisconsin Election Commission isn't really set up to do that. At first, I don't think they have jurisdiction over non-election officials. They would only, basically, you're supposed to be able to talk to the city clerk. Well, you're running it this way. I want it run this way. And then you go to the Wisconsin Elections Commission as a citizen, and then the Wisconsin Election Commission makes a decision to correct or not, reviewed by Circuit Court, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court. That's a great process. We like the Wisconsin Elections Commission because of that openness, but it's not allowed to be followed here because you're involving private corporations.
And one more. In the course of your investigation so far, have you determined who paid the salaries of Michael Spritzer Rubenstein and Ahmad Rivera Wagner? Who they were working for? Were there contracts in place that covered these individuals and what their duties were? Do you have any detail surrounding those two individuals?
No. We only have documents to date from the city, and those documents weren't included. We suspect they were private corporate employees because that's how they identified themselves.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Tesler.
Yeah, thank you. So first, thank you for your passion for fair and transparent elections. I think that's really awesome and inspiring for our whole group. I've noticed, you seem to be very up to date kind of on where this investigation currently is. What are the next steps that you'd recommend for us to continue learning more about what happened and trying to handle this situation in the most appropriate way? Well,
I think to return to the fundamentals, and I'm sort of like a populist, so I'm like, the representatives here need to represent the people. And so that if you focus on that, then you say, okay, we said we had a democratic election according to law. That's what the people wanted, but they didn't get it in Green Bay, and we want to make sure they get it in the future. And so then you focus that you're representing the people, We don't have democracy in Green Bay. We got something else. And so we need to investigate. So when we investigate, I investigate, you investigate, the Wisconsin Election Commission investigates, the first thing we want from Green Bay, Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, and Racine are 52 cards up on the table. So that's how we start. And once we get the 52 cards up on the table, then we can start looking at, the private corporations and the Center for Tech and Civic Life, and then we go look for their documents. And so you have this just huge clash, and I'm so sorry this has happened, that between one side that said this is, I guess the mayor here said this was an impeccably run election, right? And then you have the other side saying, well, wait a minute, it might have been impeccable, but it was illegal. Like I had one public official I won a lawsuit against, and he said, my program, he said, I admit my program was illegal, but it was still worthwhile. So you have that problem, you see, that if you mix the moral with the legal, they've already probably factored that in. So the point is that even if you prevail and we get the municipal clerks operating in a good way, they've already baked in the cake the idea that, it's illegal, but it's still worthwhile. So that's the kind of opponents you're dealing with. And so you have to be very savvy. You have to be, okay, that's where we are. The people elected us. We enact the laws for the people. These cities have to follow those laws. And that's how we represent the people. Now, I don't want it to go to court. The court would be the last place that you'd want this to end up. Why? Because that should be the last resort. Public officials should follow not just one law, not some of the laws, not many of the laws. They have to follow all the laws. And so this is a way, when you do your investigation, they'll try to distract you. Well, don't look at those laws that I mentioned in the earlier question about authority. Look at these. But right now we just need to focus on authority because that's the evidence we have. And then we'll find downstream, and I think everyone knows, that the private corporations wanted to favor certain demographic groups. And so can we have that in future elections? No. I can provide you some case law support on that. It's pretty scant. This is kind of a new type of violation of law. But the one case I found was a school district in Delaware. I should mention this. It's helpful in your investigation. So the school district in Delaware wanted the bond referendum passed. And so they had the election, an off general election. The only polling place was at the school. And then they had a carnival for the students and free food for the parents and students. And they got the bond referendum passed, and the judge threw it out because he said, well, when you're favoring a demographic group, that's as bad as suppressing a demographic group. And so we have to, that's what kind of animates the discussion, because the private corporations, 400 million, maybe another 400 million, they really thought this through. They had like $1 billion, and they're very smart people. Arguably the best and the brightest. But in America, with respect to elections, we don't violate election laws. So there's like one flaw in their thinking, right? And their flaw in their thinking is very important to the rest of us. That in Green Bay, it's the municipal clerk who's appointed to perform the election duties. Your great plan, you had $1 billion, you're the best and brightest, you won the 2020 election, congratulations, whatever. But the point is, you can't violate election law because you're breaching the social contract. And so, do any of us, based on this record, fully accept the results in Green Bay? No, of course not. There's a chain of custody problems. What if you, like a university student government election, one of the candidates had the ballot box, and then he wins by a few votes? Well, you don't just accept it. You go, why did he have a ballot box? What was he doing with the ballot box? And those are all fair questions for investigation. So I look forward to working with Madam Chairperson and the committee and doing whatever we can to flush things out. But really, Wisconsin is, what's the phrase, overused phrase, ground zero for election integrity, because we have the evidence. So we have to figure this out, not only for Wisconsin, but for the nation, because it's an important issue.
Representative Rosar.
I'm not sure how to turn this on.
Just tap it.
Oh, just over there. Over here.
The red one. The red.
Tap green
Needs to
now.
go green.
Oh, I got it. I'm sorry. I'm a freshman legislator. Oh, I'm talking into the light. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my word. That is embarrassing.
No.
It looked like a microphone to me.
It does.
So I have a question. This is the example of what you found out in Green Bay. Are there like investigations going on in Madison, Kenosha, Racine, and Milwaukee? You've made the statement several times that we assume this same MO was used in those other cities, but are there active investigations like you've done in Green Bay?
Yes, Wisconsin Voters Alliance is requesting documents. But with respect to the Open Records Act requests, Green Bay has been the most honorable, and so we're very happy with Green Bay's responses. And we'll continue to pursue the documents from the other cities, and maybe if you have enough people, the legislators, concerned citizens, election integrity groups, maybe even Milwaukee will fork over the stuff, right? And so it's really important to realize that this is so important to them. But the point is that the transparency is required by the Open Records Act. So eventually we'll get the documents. So if you don't, it's funny, I had my Minnesota Voters Alliance client, once we sat there for hours saying, how can we request that we get the documents before the election? And I said, well, we can't, because we're about election integrity. It's not about one election. So you got to take the long term. And even if it takes till 2022 to get the documents, that's fine. Because they're not going anywhere, and the idea is we're not either. It's sort of one of those deals. My father used to say, "The squares shall inherit the earth." So on these issues, you got to be really square. I mean, you got to stay on point, stay focused. And election integrity is one of those issues where we can win because the people are behind us on these sort of things. I mean, they just are.
So are you getting open opposition from those other cities in obtaining documents?
Yeah, I'd have to review that. I'm not prepared to answer that, but I can get back to you, Representative. Thank you.
Representative Thiesel.
The CTCL, I don't know if they were the ones distributing the funds and making the decision, or if it was the parent organization whose name escapes me right now. But to your knowledge, do you have any knowledge of why these particular 5 were selected? I mean, I can speculate, of course, but it's even bothersome to me here that these group had what apparently was a recognizable nickname.
Right. So that's a great question. So Center for Tech and Civic Life, this is all in the public domain. Mr. Zuckerberg and his wife gave them $400 million, and that was distributed then to these, at least initially, to these urban areas. In Racine, the mayor, if I think I got this right, received a $10,000 grant to coordinate the other mayors, and then they filed a joint application. And that joint application then became the July approved document where they got $6 million. And then that led to the private corporations to be introduced. Now, at the Got Freedom website, that's the little thing in the bottom here, there's an excellent researcher named James Carlson of West Kansas, who has a group of researchers, not a lawyer, and he was hired to do the research on CTCL. So at the Got Freedom website, there's a super appendix, and the first reports are from Mr. Carlson, and he has a chart in there that connects all these allied nonprofits, and some of the nonprofits have government board members, like secretaries of state and so forth, and election officials. And on this other side, they have nonprofits with just citizens on them, but they're all integrated. And so the Secretary of States are working with the urban election officials, who are working with the donors, who are working with these people on the ground. And so this has been going on for quite some time. So we're not saying that anything's wrong with that. I mean, it's sort of like complaining about environmental nonprofits influencing federal land management decisions. Okay, but what's wrong with it is they set themselves up to violate Wisconsin election law. And that's the problem. And so if you read his report, you get all the connections. And then here I'm giving you the specific, and answer the earlier question, who has authority over elections in Green Bay? Wisconsin Election Commission and the municipal clerk. So
Did every municipality in the state have an equal opportunity to apply to get money under this grant, so to say, this private grant?
the way it apparently worked was the early cities, these Wisconsin cities and Philadelphia, and then the cities in Michigan, Georgia, in Fulton County in Georgia, and Maricopa County in Arizona, that they were the ones who got the conditions. So the conditions were applied in the urban election areas. Then once the Thomas More Society, Amistad Project, and these state election integrity groups started filing lawsuits in federal court challenging that grant process, then it appears the Center for Tech and Civic Life opened up the grant application process. So it was really a live dynamic during the election. The federal lawsuit that we filed in Wisconsin, for example, was dismissed from federal court for lack of Article 3 standing, which means that the federal courts don't recognize this type of voter lawsuit, but doesn't preclude a lawsuit in state court, which would come, the way it would happen in Wisconsin would be administrative complaint in the Wisconsin Election Commission. They get to choose to investigate or not, but they have to dispose of it. Then it would go to the circuit court in Brown County, Court of Appeals, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But again, we don't want to do that. It'd be far better if the Wisconsin Election Commission, like Madam Chairperson, whoever, said, hey, look, we got this report. Would you please make sure that this is investigated, because we need to, according to the laws that you have, or we have, we need to make sure that corrections are made. So that would be, so this is the narrative that the Wisconsin Election Commission staff should be excited to engage in, because their job is election integrity.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess what I'm trying to drill down on here is, as I said in the question, did all municipalities have this opportunity? It doesn't appear that they did. I don't, maybe eventually it changed. You talked about how it kind of was a flexible process moving forward. But then, did we have other municipalities that applied for the funds and were denied? And what was the criteria that was being used to say, you said the mayor of Racine, Mayor Mason was somehow received a grant to facilitate this? I mean, did he have his special cities he targeted, or did he offer it to all municipalities? I'm from Fond du Lac. I have no knowledge that anything was offered to Fond du Lac.
A more direct response would be that only these urban areas were first identified, selected, and given grants. And then sometime in September, it was announced the money would be available for other cities. It was open to everybody. And money was spread all over the place. The cities in Wisconsin, all over the place. I think, I just kind of laughed. In Hinds County, Alabama, they said, we got the money, but we're going to use it for tennis courts. And so there weren't any conditions on these smaller cities and counties that got the money. The conditions apparently were just focused on the urban areas because they were favoring a demographic group. And now this, again, I'm not talking about the 2020 election and the result. We're talking about the future. So I'm not crying, we could have done better in Wisconsin. I'm just saying that in the future, like I think the question suggests, is that it should be open to everybody and there should be no conditions, or there shouldn't be any, right? It has to be equal.
And so the mayor of Racine, he was given, I forget the dollar amount for the city, to find the municipalities that would have the conditions included in order to run there, to receive the money in the operation of their election. Is that
right? He was
accurate?
the leader, and I think that the grant amount was $10,000, the initial grant. Of course, that led to the $6 million, right?
Right, for those 5 communities.
Right.
All right, thank you.
I guess what I also say that other communities did get lesser dollar amounts around the state. I really don't remember the numbers, but there were other communities, certainly throughout the state, who did get, not to that extent, but did get dollar amounts as well. Additional questions? Representative Murphy.
Thank you. One good piece of information for us to be able to get our hands on, Madam Chairman, you talked about money being distributed around the state. It would be interesting to know how much went to the big 5, and then how much went to the other municipalities. Sir, where is the CTCL located?
In Chicago.
It's in Chicago. Okay, thank you. I assumed it wasn't in Wisconsin. So, Mr. Spitzer Rubenstein, by taking control of the counting room in Green Bay, did he break any law that we know?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what I'm saying is that that the legal authority for the county room rests in the clerk, and I've explained the story that the municipal clerk was not in control of the election, and so it's problematic. Now, I think that she was put on leave of absence, or she took a leave of absence, I forget. So on the day of the election, I think Celestine Jeffries was operating as the municipal clerk. And so if it was authorized, then that's one step. But you also have this diversion of election responsibilities to a private corporation, which is unheard of. And so it's a sui generis. It's a new situation, a new type. So when I'm presented with these issues of first impression, when representing people suing the government, there's always this aspect like, here's a problem, right? I mean, we want to assume the best of our public officials, that they're always following the law. But as I mentioned before, there's something horrific about law enforcing officials violating the law. So it's almost like it's the opposite. We want to presume the best, but when you have someone who enforces the law, I mean, literally, the clerk reports voter fraud, reports election fraud. The clerk is a law enforcing official, and if you have the law enforcing official violating the election law, well, it's horrific. All the resources should be on how are we going to fix this? We can't allow this to stand, because how can we accept results? So the answer to your question is, we're continuing the investigation. It seems to me a chain of custody violation. Seems to me to be a problem, but the specific legal issue I'm raising today is who has the legal authority over that election, and can it be transferred to a private corporation? And the answer under Wisconsin law is
yeah, and that's where I'm sort of going here. So is Mr. Rubenstein culpable for what happened, or is the person who allowed him to be in that situation culpable? So it would be, it sounds like maybe it would be the municipal clerk would be culpable because they allowed him to do that, but then the clerk was on leave. Do we know anything about why the clerk was on leave?
Oh, yeah, because she expressed why, right?
Okay.
In the email I read, she said that I can't do my job, and then she ended up leaving and getting a new job. And so I have never spoken to Ms. Teskey just based on the evidence.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, it appears she was pushed out or forced out. And then, so the gal who did end up taking it over, Jeffries, Ms. Jeffries, how does she come into possession of that position, or become in charge of it, and then does she become culpable for transfer of the responsibilities to the count room to Rubenstein?
Right. I think there's University of Chicago law professor Kaardal Llewellyn had this saying that I always bring to mind, and that is, technique without ideals is a menace. Ideals without techniques is a mess. So, you had very poor technique here, so it's a mess. They may have been idealistic in the sense they were trying to accomplish something they thought was good, but it's a mess and a menace. It's both. You had really a lack of ideals because they weren't focusing on following the laws, and then you have a mess because it was implemented very poorly. Mm-hmm. And so we don't want to jump to, this is a menace and this is a bunch of illegalities and so forth. We just want to say, look, I mean, this is a mess and we expect something better. So when I go to court and win against a public official, it's not that we're anti-government. It's just that this redeems the government. It's the way it's supposed to work. So the Wisconsin Election Commission could have a routine investigation upon your request and say, it can't be run this way. You got to keep the private corporations out of election administration, and you have the clerk run the election. Now, but in answer to your question about accountability, I mean, it all starts with the mayor's office and the city council because they approve the conditions. The mayor's office and the city council committee brought in the private corporations, and then you have this. And we have the record. So, yeah, it really just gets down to the authority. And so the phrase that we use, and we're all in polite society here, right? This is a very polite place, a beautiful building and so forth. But the phrase that I would use, and it'll be funny because it's so minimalist, right? But it's legally unauthorized. The private corporations were legally unauthorized. The mayor was legally unauthorized. The city councils approved these conditions of CTCL. It was legally unauthorized. The private corporations being invited in by the city council, the mayor's chief of staff, the city council committee was legally unauthorized. So the way that we do this as an establishment, let's say, is that you end up saying this is the way it should work. You missed the mark. And so Wisconsin Election Commission, let's work with Green Bay so that they can hit the mark next time. And I think it's, and then in fairness, because I almost like lulling you to sleep, on this task, you have worthy opponents. I mean, I can't tell you how powerful Center for Tech and Civic Life and these nonprofits are. These are worthy opponents. I mean, you're going to be scrapping against the big tech giants, all these people. They all thought this through. They're willing to spend more than $400 million on it, probably another $400 million on the other private corporations. And so that's what it's talking about. And so what authority do you have? You have authority to make law, but you already made them and they're good laws. You have the authority to investigate what you're doing here. And it's, those old sayings that always come back, like sunshine is the greatest disinfectant. And just don't let them distract you, because this is the key: is who has the authority, who let the private corporations in. Why would he have the keys?
And your point is very well taken. I mean, anybody who's willing to spend $400 million on this, I have a feeling is looking at this committee and laughing and saying, who are these guys? We got $400 million. We can crush them if we want to. So just my last comment is, what I'm trying to figure out is, so if Ms. Jeffries is not quite culpable and Mr. Rubenstein is not quite culpable, they're close to the line but maybe not quite over it. And I look at how do the laws need to be changed then to make sure that somebody is culpable for what's happened, and that's I think what we'd like to get to. But
that's where I have the happy news, right? Is that the happy news is that you have incredible remedies here in Wisconsin to address this. And so if you look at Chapter 7 regarding the Wisconsin Election Commission, any resident of Green Bay can file a complaint with the Wisconsin Elections Commission asking for this to be investigated and corrected. And the words in, I think it's 7.06, say, for events that have occurred or are occurring. So the Wisconsin Election Commission uniquely can look back and say, look, based on this evidence, we need a correction moving forward. And so I've been involved in these election integrity disputes before, and you have to set up your clients and say, look, this is what success looks like. And what success looks like here is, a correction. But that is success, because the private corporations are going to stick around and they're going to continue to run the elections in your urban cities here. So what you need from the Wisconsin Election Commission, which has the general authority to implement the election law and has the power to investigate, is a correction. And so you just have a correction, and then in the future it's corrected. So it's just extraordinarily powerful, the Wisconsin Election Commission and the remedies that you've provided, and you allow citizens that are residents of the jurisdiction to file complaints and so forth. Now, if the Wisconsin Election Commission doesn't want to cooperate with such a careful, deliberative investigation, then what happens is then the complainant gets to appeal to the Brown County Circuit Court. And then the Brown County Circuit Court looks at the diversion of power, that was caused by the mayor and the city council and the conditions and all that. And the Circuit Court says, well, Wisconsin Election Commission, there's probable cause, you got to investigate. And that's how we advance the ball. So It's sort of interesting because this example I'm going here, Wisconsin elections are, election administration is in tough shape, but these statutes are a model for the nation. This idea that citizens can complain and the Wisconsin Election Commission can fix. I mean, it's much more difficult in states that have secretaries of state and don't have those procedures to take the Secretary of State's office and others to task. So that's the simple approach.
Your remedy, though, was for someone to go to the circuit court, and then the circuit court would say, Election Commission, you need to investigate. So what makes the Election Commission investigate it in a thorough, nonpartisan manner?
Oh, I think at bottom that the public officials on the Wisconsin Election Commission are good people, and we got to set the ideology aside because we're not questioning the 2020 result, and we're just moving forward. And I think the staff will do a good job. I think the Wisconsin Election Commission will do a good job, and we move forward. And thank God, and I'm a lawyer, so I can say this. Thank God you can appeal to circuit court if they don't. So.
And I see 3-3 votes in my future.
Any further questions?
I just have one quick one. So, short of the Wisconsin slice of the $400 million coming from, what's his name?
Civic Tech.
Zuckerberg, thank you. Could something like this have happened in Wisconsin, and could it happen again, unless there's an infusion of money like this?
So the question is, are they planning on doing it again?
Yes, in some sort of way. I mean,
the biggest sign we have is after the general election in Fulton County in Georgia got 6 million. There was a U.S. Senate runoff. So you went from a general election to just 2 seats. And Center for Tech and Civic Life gave another 4 million to Fulton County. And so the Green Bay municipal clerk says they want more money, and I'm sure they'll all want more money. So I think that the threat is there.
and so as you said earlier, the new Green Bay city clerk was the mayor's chief of staff. So
that's right, who participated in the diversion of the election duties away from Chris Teskey.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
So now that I know how to do it right.
And I just want to remind that we do have quite a few more people that want to testify today. So
Yeah, I just, I'm a little sick to my stomach, and I'm not sure if it's because of what's happened in the last hour or because it's near lunch. This is alarming, and I think that you're absolutely right. I really appreciate your comment about the suppression or favoring of demographic groups is wrong, no matter which direction it is in. And you've given some really excellent testimony, and I appreciate it. And it's a cause for alarm that we should all be concerned about, because we do have a responsibility to our electorate to run transparent, fair elections. And it disturbs me that we have good laws in place, and those laws, because of the strength of our opponents, may be laughed at, as Representative Murphy states. And so we need to get this right for future elections, and I really appreciate you coming this morning.
Thank you.
all right, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your information, and it is going to be made available in the record as well.
Thank you.
With that, we will bring up Sandy Juneau.